Well, thanks, Patchy, for the introduction, I think. I'm not sure, but I'm very pleased to be here. I want to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of country and pay my respect to the elders past, present and future. I want to acknowledge the Light of Faith, who's the Labor candidate for Leichhardt, the seat based up here around Cairns. And I want to thank everyone for the invitation to once again address this time the 2018 Australasian Bus Industry Conference. I am a bit of a regular. My wife said to me last night, "Where are you going tomorrow again?" And I said, "Cairns." She said, "What for?" It's always a bit sus when you say you're going to Cairns. I said, "It's work. I'm only there for the day. It's for the bus industry." She said, "You spoke to the bus industry a couple of months ago." I said, "Yeah, they like talking." And I'm very pleased with the interaction that I have with this organisation that, of course, punches way above its weight and is concerned not just, I think, with the bus industry, but also with public transport, with cities, with regions, with the quality of life for Australians, and it does a very good job. You always have a bus outside, and we've done the obligatory photo outside, and it is good to continue to work with Michael and Wayne and with others in the team here who play such a critical role as well in the Better Cities group, that is a bipartisan group that operates in the National Parliament. Can I say that your engagement across all levels of government and with other industry organisations has become even more important as we progress through this century. This is a time of monumental change, and I know that the conference is considering how technology will affect how we live, how we work and how we play. Perhaps the most significant change in how we deal with things was in 2008 when we appointed the first ever National Infrastructure Minister. We created Infrastructure Australia, and we set about through creating the Major Cities Unit, changing the way that the national government dealt with transport issues, so that we had business cases prepared, so that we looked at what the cost-benefit ratio was of projects that were coming forward. And in that, of course, public transport does pretty well. Of course, in 2008 as well, something far more significant than that happened globally. That was the first time, according to the World Bank, that the world tipped over so that more than half of the population were urban rather than rural. And that's a trend, of course, that is going to continue. By 2050, the world is expected to become 70% urban. And here in Australia, of course, our urban population, whether it be in our capital cities or our regional cities like Cairns and Townsville and those others, particularly up and down the coast, but Mount Isa and others, is one of the fastest growing in the OECD. Managing this growth requires a safe and efficient public transport system. You will have seen today, perhaps, you might have seen the government roll out a population policy saying that they will encourage new migrants to go to the regions. What we did was write through Bill Shorten to Scott Morrison just last Friday, suggesting a bipartisan group of eminent persons agreed to by both sides of politics examine population policy, settlement policy, infrastructure, urban congestion, labour market, all of these issues in a way that will go beyond a term of government or indeed beyond any particular person. That might not be too long given the way we conduct politics in this country, or party in government. And I think that's pretty consistent with the approach we've had by trying to break that nexus between infrastructure policy, which by definition is long-term, and the short-term nature of the political cycle, whereby too often, because one side comes up with an idea, the other side says it's no good, and we just, run around in circles. What we need to do, I think, in the national interest is be prepared to break through that. And that's something that I've tried to do in my political engagement. And I think that at the media conference I just held before this speech, I've called upon the new Prime Minister to really give consideration, because I don't want to see the population debate and those issues come down to what some of the more populist non-major party people would like to see, which is saying that the problem with urban congestion is those people who don't look like me. That's what we need to avoid in this country, and that's why we need a serious approach to it. The fact is that our public transport network underpins the movement of people in our cities and our towns around the nation. Buses are an integral part of the network. You provide jobs for more than 42,900 people who work as bus and coach drivers while ensuring we all reach our destination safely. Indeed, since the last census, bus use has increased in Australia, with more than 320,000 people in 2016 using buses to travel to work, or, as I did, importantly, as a young fella each and every day, catch a bus to school. With the right investment, I'm confident that more and more Australians will choose public transport as their preferred means of travel. But we must also recognise that the transport sector is susceptible to disruption and that there will be significant changes in the decades to come. That's why this conference, its focus on future mobility, connectivity and technology in the bus and coach sector is so important. We can't stop change, but we can make it work for us. When people ask what a future Labor government would do, my starting point is to point to our strong track record of investing in towns and cities across the nation. Every year I've turned up at this conference wherever it's been held, Canberra, Hobart, Adelaide, I think it's been just about everywhere, Melbourne, Perth. I turn up every year. There's only one thing that's certain, there'll be a different bloke, and they've all been blokes on the other side, representing the other side of politics. I think that there is an advantage in a bit of consistency, and I think offer that, because that I'm committed to the principles that I put in place when a minister, just for those 6 years, and I'd be committed to putting it back in place as well. Restoring national leadership by appointing the Infrastructure Australia, making sure it's once again back at the centre of the process, making sure that the major cities unit is re-established and that we deal with that as well. Of course, when in government as well, we built or upgraded 7,500 kilometres of road, including, of course, completing the duplication of the Hume, accelerating the upgrade of the Pacific Highway to dual carriageway, improving the safety and flood immunity of hundreds of kilometres of the Bruce Highway. We rebuilt a third of the interstate rail freight network. We committed more funding to urban public transport than all our predecessors since Federation combined. So that record will provide the template for what we'll do in the future. Get the structures right, but also make the investment that's necessary. In short, there'll be two key elements for Labor's infrastructure agenda for the nation. First, if we're to maximise the economic, social and environmental dividends that infrastructure policy has to be got right, and that starts with that commitment to a long-term strategy based on an objective evidence-based assessment of the nation's infrastructure needs. In practice, that is about Infrastructure Australia, respecting it, making sure that it makes recommendations, not what's occurred in recent years, which is government announcements and then IA recommendations retrofitted to it. Secondly, we'll reverse the projected decline in federal investment and provide real funding to the real projects that have been identified and properly assessed by a re-empowered Infrastructure Australia. Not only will we proceed with all the new projects that have been announced in the budget, we'll add to them to create a more ambitious capital works program assessed by a re-empowered Infrastructure Australia. This includes, of course, Brisbane's Cross River Rail project that was approved by IA back in 2012, Sydney's Western Metro, the rail line through Badgerys Creek Airport will provide support, particularly in our capital cities, but also in our regions, of giving road funding for the important highways and connectivity points between our regional cities. Labor understands that as one of the most urbanised nations in the world, Australia's continued prosperity will largely depend on how successful we are at making our cities work better, whether they be our capitals or our regional cities. That demands investment in both their road and rail infrastructure. So it is highly relevant that this conference is being held in Cairns today. Our regional cities and towns in particular grapple with the challenge of mobility and an ageing population. One of the ways in which we can encourage people to move to the regions is making sure that they can be confident that they can get around. And by and large, in our regional cities, it is you that deliver that mobility. Low volume markets may not produce the same return as high volume markets in capital cities, but they are just as important. We need to ensure that people have access to services, supermarkets and each other. This strengthens communities and breaks down social isolation. The value of regional bus operators cannot be overestimated. We must continue to support them and recognise the fundamental role that these bus operators play in the viability of our regional economies, supporting the health and access opportunities of people living in our regions. But mobility is not just important for those living in regional communities. It also, of course, matters for visitors. Coach travel is enjoyed by almost 500,000 international tourists and more than 1.5 million domestic travellers. Just look at the thousands of tourists travelling by bus between Cairns and Port Douglas, or from their hotels to activities, whether that be going out on the reef or other activities here, skydiving or whitewater rafting. It is a bus that will pick you up at your accommodation and take you to the location in which you're going to enjoy those recreational activities. And that's why a great example of the fact that you are the facilitator of job creation, not just for yourselves, but for the entire regional economies, particularly those regional economies here in far north Queensland that rely very much upon tourism, which is a super growth sector for Australia. We need to consider how we can improve coach access in our cities and regions so that visitors can be more easily transported from hubs like airports or cruise terminals to tourist destinations across the country. I'm familiar with the National Strategy for Regional Land Transport Tourism that your Confederation has developed, and I commend you once again for outstanding policy work, for your contribution to this important policy debate. I commit myself, as I did, with taking up the 30-minute city idea that you had. I think you were first out of the bus terminal with that policy. I beat the other mob by a few years, but you were out there first. And when I announced our policy, I certainly gave your organisation credit for it. The bus and coach sector are also essential when it comes to ensuring urban connectivity. Recently, the Parliament's Committee on Infrastructure, Transport and Cities released the Building Up and Moving Out report. While I don't agree with all of the recommendations, the report is a good one. It makes an important contribution to the nation's ongoing debate. Of particular significance to the conference is recommendation 11, which focuses on the need for cities to have an efficient public transport network. It suggests that government should collaborate to embrace innovation, create a more sustainable model of urban transport connectivity, and promote investment in the development of a public transport network capable of meeting the goal of a 30-minute city. Just like you, I'm an advocate of the 30-minute city, and of course, buses are an essential component of that equation. Our heavy rail lines or light rail can play a really important role in getting people longer distances, but unless you have bus connections, it falls down. And it's the bus connections and that connectivity that are so important if we're going to have a serious approach to this. So the government talks at the moment about congestion busting, but adopting this recommendation and investing in public transport infrastructure rather than just talking about it is what will make a very real difference. Because our cities can't afford more rhetoric. You can't hitch a ride on a speech. You actually need a bus or a train to do it. And our cities too much, because of the change that happened at the end of 2013 with the shift away from the investment that had been allocated over to toll roads, cities simply won't function of the size that we're talking about. Sydney and Melbourne, 8 million, southeast Queensland, they won't survive just on roads. You actually do need rail investment as well. We know that traffic congestion is already costing the economy about $16 billion a year in lost productivity, but that's due to rise to $53 billion, according to Infrastructure Australia, by 2031. But it's not just about productivity, it's about the quality of life. Because most of the job creation in recent years with the changes in the economy have been in inner suburbs, in areas like finance and law and service provision, and we've seen a decline in a lot of the jobs in the outer areas. There's been a real disconnect that was identified in the State of Australian Cities reports that we produced between where people work and where people live. And what that means is that too many people are living in drive-in, drive-out suburbs where they spend more time at home in their car than they do, going to work in their car than they do at home with their kids. The truth is that technology will assist us in overcoming some of our urban challenges. Technology has facilitated the greater use of bus lanes, which have in turn led to express routes. I think this is pretty good. It has an added advantage, as you'd be aware, and that people sitting in their cars watch the buses go past them. It gives them a very practical reminder of the benefit of public transport. There are other things that are underway as well. The Managed Motorways program, another innovation that was actually cut in the 2014 budget, can make an enormous difference in incorporating intelligent transport solutions into urban motorway networks. These include entry ramp signalling, variable speed limit signs, CCTVs and digital message signs that provide motorists with live updates on traffic conditions and delays. But technology is also disruptive. We know it will impact the transport sector, and indeed it already has. This includes the rise of car share with the introduction of Uber and other similar companies. Today in Australia there are 3.8 million regular Uber riders and some 62,000 active driver partners. The taxi industry has understandably resisted Uber, but that hasn't made a substantial difference. The share economy is driven by the internet, which makes regulation very difficult. Not impossible, but difficult. But these changes do require a government response. As Stephen Hawking said, we are not going to stop making progress or reverse it, so we must recognise the dangers and control them. In addition to recognising dangers, we should also be looking at how we can make these advancements in technology work for us, not just for some of us, but for all of us. Automation is one area where this will be the key. Research from CEDA indicates that up to 5 million jobs could be affected by automation by 2030. Governments need to be forward-thinking about how best to manage this change. If it is managed well, the changing nature of work has the potential to improve the quality of life of people especially those who work in the transport industry with new, highly skilled and well-paid jobs. But if managed poorly, the gap between the haves and have-nots will only widen. And as Michael Cannon-Brookes, co-founder of Atlassian, told a recent Senate inquiry on this very issue, hope is not a tactic. We need to actively and genuinely pursue a strategy aimed at ensuring those people who will be displaced by new technology have the skills that they need for the jobs of the future. The fact is that the federal government's cuts to vocational education actively undermine our ability to achieve this. Investment and leadership from the national government is critical. So too is collaboration. Tackling issues such as automated transport offers a great opportunity for genuine collaboration between governments, employers and trade unions in an area that is undeniably in their common interest. Over the past 10 years, as both the Minister and the Shadow, I've regularly met with transport workers. The passion that transport workers have for their industry is obvious, and it is this passion that is so important as we plan for the future of work. This type of planning is currently underway in Singapore, which has launched its Land Transport Industry Transformation Map. This strategy seeks to leverage emerging technology to improve the land transport system, grow productivity and enhance the commuter experience, while also future-proofing the workforce through upskilling and reskilling programs. For the bus and coach sector, there are a number of opportunities in this space. The truth is that mass transit will always have an important role to play. We'll always want to reduce congestion, not grow it, by having more cars on the road, automated or not. Dedicated bus lanes can carry 8,000 people an hour. In contrast, cars move less than 1,000 per hour. Your sector is already talking about what other opportunities might exist. For example, Michael, in his comments to the Senate inquiry on your behalf into cities, observed that automation could enable buses to compete directly with rail. He said this: autonomy is going to drive a whole different outcome. Platooning bus seats or platooning vehicles that operate on a dedicated route but have the capacity to hive off to service individual suburbs. As many of you know, platooning is an application of automated driving technology that uses wireless communications to allow two or more vehicles to safely travel closer together. While travelling in a platoon, the lead vehicle communicates with the following vehicles, sending commands about when and how to undertake steering, acceleration and braking. As well as improving safety, these systems will reduce costs of fuel consumption and in turn reduce pollution. Vehicle platooning in both passenger and freight applications is projected to reduce fuel consumption by as much as 20%. And that's important. 16% of Australia's greenhouse gas emissions come from cars, and transport emissions have the highest rate of growth. Electric vehicles, including buses, will help reduce emissions. In Australia, this is already being done. Adelaide has updated its Oban busway to include a number of electric buses. The Australian company tasked with manufacturing these buses, Tindo, has also been contracted to produce additional buses across Queensland, New South Wales and Victoria. In great news, this is a company that's expanded its staff from 29 to 79. One of the things that I've emphasised when doing media before this conference is that this conference isn't just about the buses going from A to B, it's about manufacturing, it's about the whole industry coming together, to your great credit. This highlights the additional opportunities that are there in manufacturing, which is very significant given the decline that's occurred in the car industry. So in conclusion, can I say that you're very right to highlight mobility, connectivity and technology as your key pillars of this conference. As the nation's demographics shift and as advancements in technology continue to gather pace, technology will shape the way that people access services and connect to their community. Government should work with the sector to ensure that the change is constructive and that the worst potential consequences of disruption and automation are avoided. For my part, I'm committed to working with each and every one of you to ensure that the bus and coach sector remains strong. I know that Elida here in Cairns is committed to doing what she can in this local community to improve the amenity for all those who live here and those who come and have the pleasure of visiting here. So I wish you all the best, and I look forward to coming back here next year, maybe with the worst word in politics erased from my title, and that word is, of course, shadow. Thanks very much.